Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm here with Professor Art Vanden Houten, and I deliberately lead with the title of professor because I know that's the
Thank you for
title.
doing that. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
but Professor Vanden Houten is also the Dean of Academic Life at Flagler College, as I'm sure many of the students know. And I'm so excited to have this opportunity to sit down and talk about one of my favorite books that this guy introduced me to about 1,000 years ago.
Right, exactly. It's great.
we were
It's much more
contemporaries.
recent in my life than it was in your life, but right.
Contemporaries of Aeschylus, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
No, it's the Oresteia, and I first read it as an undergraduate student in Introduction to Political Thought when it was taught by Professor Vanden Houten. So he's agreed to sit down with me today.
2001, 19 years ago.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Let's not share all those details. They don't need the chronology here.
Sorry, I'm not supposed to share those details. I apologize.
I tell them I'm 27.
Right, exactly.
All right, so my vision is just for us to kind of geek out together about a book that I think we both.
I'm all about it, right? It's surely one of my favorite texts. There's no question about that. I mean, when people sometimes I'll see those things on on Facebook or whatever, or Instagram will be like, what would be your 10 books? And I'm like, all right, Aeschylus, I got that. I know I'm going to start there, right? That's always going to be, I mean, in some ways it's just my favorite book, right? And it's one of my favorite books to teach, to be in the classroom with students. And when they're, I think they encounter it for the first time, there's a sense of like, what is going on here? And, probably for the first time I taught it was in 1997. I taught it every semester. I taught that class. I'll be like, look, it's hard in the beginning, but remember, there's just a lot of blood, sex, violence. It's all pretty cool, right? And, there's a sense of that kind of a kind of hook. But for me, it's just truly one of the great treasures. I'm great. I'm so happy we have a chance to talk about it.
All right, so I've got some questions here.
Good.
So I'll ask, let's start with your favorite scene.
So wait, let me ask you a quick question. So will you get to answer will I get to ask you the questions too? Will you answer?
Absolutely. If you can wrest control of the conversation away from me, you can ask.
Okay, good, yeah. All right.
Yeah, so what's your favorite scene?
So my favorite scene, I mean, I was going to jump in, right, and say immediately. So I got three, right, and I'll hit the second and third ones first, right, and then I'll talk about my favorite scene of all. So my second favorite scene is the moment in the third play, right, when Clytemnestra's ghost has awoken the Furies, right, and there's this great symbolism there where the first two plays early on, there's this idea of a god, right? Whether it's Zeus or Apollo, right, is driving the kind of main character, right? Agamemnon in the first play, and then Orestes in the second play, and then here we go in the third play. Suddenly, there's a human who's like driving the gods. Clytemnestra's trying to wake them up, right? And then when they get into this back and forth with Apollo, right? So the Furies and Apollo are just hailing invective at each other, spitting bitter anger at each other. It's kind of that symbolic moment, right, where we see the tragic dimension, we see these irreconcilable claims, right, between these competing goods, and then there's a sense of there's like an opening moment there for the combination of human freedom and human responsibility, right? This is going to kind of have to be resolved by humans. The gods' competing claims can't sort of fully resolve, or adequately, fully is probably the wrong word, but can't adequately resolve it, right? And of course, this comes to full, sort of stated explicitly by Athena when she calls together the trial and says this is an issue, right? That mortals have to, the deathless ones, right, can't resolve this. The mortals have to do it. My third favorite scene is that great scene in the second play, Libation Bearers, where Orestes and Electra recognize each other, and they're trying to, Electra and the chorus are trying to kind of tell him what's happening, and he reveals, right, he's been sent on this mission, and he's ready to go. And there's this kind of very subtle, it seems very subtle moment where he gives this long speech, right, and he's going on and on and on about the sort of the crime against his father and he just can't keep the focus on it just as he just keeps dragging it toward his mother, right? And then trying to drag it back again because it seems psychologically that's so difficult. And he says, I'm going to kill them. And then he ends it, I'm not going to stand there triumphantly with my sword. I'm going to kill them and then I'm going to die, right? It's kind of like this moment of just incredible, incredible tension for him and for the audience too, right? But for me, there's nothing like the scene between Clytemnestra and Agamemnon, right? When he comes and he's like standing there, and you know, I always try to say to students, the play is just so poorly titled, right? To call it Agamemnon. I mean, he shows up at line 780 or something like that. He's on stage for 400 lines, and he's makes an ass out of himself and dies. Now, people who study some of this more in the context of the ancient Greek world will sometimes tell me, well, it would have felt a lot more tragic to the audience. Like, it would have felt like undeserving to the audience. I mean, I don't know. This is an audience, right? That's got like Socrates in it and Aristophanes in it. I'm not so sure, right? They would have had the romantic, heroic notions of him. So that's kind of my favorite scene, right? That scene where she just gives this incredible, incredible speech, right? She speaks at great length to someone listening truly, or hearing, right? Listening and hearing. She tells him a lot, but of course he misses all of it. And then she, you know, so skillfully kind of manipulates him, right? And there's that great like moment, like line, right? Where as she realizes this is all working, and she's in a kind of long monologue, right? The line that sort of ends it in a moment is like, she says something like, oh, the ecstasy to flee the yoke of fate, right? And the way Aeschylus sort of brilliantly weaves in there, right? The subtle gesture toward sexuality with the word ecstasy, the whole notion of this kind of bold bid for freedom on her part, or a kind of autonomy, right? I mean, maybe freedom is a complicated word there, but a kind of autonomy, right? Where she is now running things. It's just this kind of powerful and wonderful moment, right? And I love where they're doing the back and forth, and she's trying to get him to walk across the tapestry, and she's kind of like rolling out like every card, right?
Right. What would Priam do if he were here?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's now, right, striding across the tapestries, and she's got that great line, right? In our translation, it's like, come on, man, like, where's the glory without a little gall? Come on, you know, you gotta kind of enjoy this moment, right? And he says, right? He says, where's the, you know, he's like, you know, where's the woman in all this thirst for
ambition, or
all this ambition, right? And he kind of course, doesn't know at that point the way in which she has just turned the whole scenario upon him. Right?
It's funny that you say that is in your top 3 favorite scenes. One of my questions is, you know, when did you first read the text and what do you remember about the play? And that's the scene I remember, probably because you did such an excellent job in class of sort of impressing on us the significance of that scene.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, when he takes his boots off and
it's like,
this is not going to end well.
And then he's like, he's like, bring Cassandra into the house. You're kind of like, oh my God, he just can't help himself.
Yeah, I think that's what gets me about that moment is just the feigned humility that he.
Yeah.
Because we know it's bullshit, because like we didn't see it. It's in the narration, but we know that he literally slaughtered his daughter to win a war over honor, you know, like, right. So, like he's not one to reject opportunities of glory, right? But here he is sort of feigning the piety and the humility, and it's a great scene.
Yeah, it's good. And I mean, I look forward to teaching that scene months in advance, right? And it kind of just like, oh, we got to get there. It'd be so cool. So.
All right. So what is your favorite passage from the play?
Yeah. So my favorite passage is probably a couple kind of strung together, right? But it's where, so we have a classic Greek thing where they go inside and the doors close and then we hear the murder, right? And we hear Agamemnon screaming, right, in agony. And of course, Cassandra rather is silent, right? And that's of course going to be repeated in the second play, right, where the man Aegisthus screams and the woman remains silent, right? And this is contrary to what Greek conceptions would have been about brave warriors, or at least, at least it's pushing against that.
What a good death is.
Yeah. Yes, right, exactly. Nicely better put, right? What a good death is. And then where she's standing on the stage and she comes out and she gives that long speech, right, where she just kind of, and again, it's broken up because the chorus interrupts her a couple times, right? And she talks about, the sort of like the power, the sense of power in killing him, right? That of course seems to loom so large. And again, this very effective way in which Aeschylus, in ways, right, I think that are, I could probably spend a week talking about this, right? In ways that sort of get distilled out of the Western tradition, probably in the 19th or 18th century, right? Where, there's long been in Aeschylus and Plato and Aristotle, a little less in Aristotle and Augustine, this way in which sex and violence and power are kind of like woven together as like very complicated threads, right? That are seen as not separate until, we get to, I don't know, people like Mill or something like that. And suddenly it's like, sort of distilled out. And right, of course, and Norman Jacobson, one of my professors in grad school, used to say, right, of the many important, right, and it's like it took feminism and feminist political thought to kind of remind the political theory of this again, right, which this thing that had been so obvious to people for thousands of years somehow gets kind of, reduced out, right? But just that moment where she is talking, she's talking about killing him. She's talking about the pleasure of like penetrating him, right, with the sword.
She like stabs him 3 times, and she
exactly
relives each stab, even like they each had their own sort of distinct significance for her. And she tells us,
right. She cites like some mythological, like there's like some mythological reference, right? I think like one or something like that, right? And then she adds that very. To me, has always been very troubling, hard to grapple with fully. Right? She says, like, here's Cassandra, her death. The phrase is something like, in our translation, it's like, it adds like a voluptuous relish to my bed. Right? This is kind of okay.
Yeah, like she's like she talks about the blood spurting onto her as she murders them, like rain falls onto like a thirsty meadow, or I forget what the language is. But yeah, it's like this intermingling of kind of death and life and murder and birth, and it's all just nightmarishly terrifying.
Exactly, right. I mean, right. And she says at one point, like, I'd stab him and the life is like bursting out of him or something, right? And it's like all over her. So there's this whole, all this complicated imagery, to put it mildly. And of course, a lot of this, right, becomes a tribute to Aeschylus, right? It's just this like, I'll be reading it and I'll be like, oh my God, like this is, how the hell is this guy doing this, right? It's just amazing.
So you mentioned you've been teaching this play for many years. Mm-hmm. And you said you've taught it every time you've taught Introduction to Political Thought, you include this in the syllabus. Yeah. So why do you keep coming back to it? Why do you think it's important for us to read this play and study this play now?
So go back to the first question, or it's one of the early questions you asked me. The first time I read it, the first time I read it, I was taking a Shakespeare class. I was in college, and I kind of really loved King Lear, and but like struggled with it like any college freshman or college senior would have done, right? And go to the professor and talk to the professor and try to get a sense on it. He's like, at one point, to probably get rid of me, he's like, I think you should read Aeschylus, right? So I read it because you're interested in politics, right? And I read it, and it was hard for me. I could see, of course, the stuff about vengeance and justice, which is obviously this cornerstone part of it, right? But the summer before I started to teach at Flagler, so the summer of 1997, I just kind of spent a lot of time trying to get a couple of my classes at least sort of like started in my mind. I had syllabi and all those things. And for some reason, wherever I was in my life at that moment, the book like really spoke to me, and the whole notion of, kind of like cosmic collisions, values that can't fully be right reconciled, the kind of classic tragic vision, right, and the notion that community in politics is an inherently fragile thing. I mean, this comes also at a time, right, when I was reading Thucydides and writing about Thucydides for my dissertation. So there's elements of that are in there too. And then
I think every grad student can identify with Orestes.
yeah, right, yeah, right, exactly, right, exactly. No, that's good, right? And then jumping in as I did when I first taught the class, right, and still when I teach it, into Plato, whose worldview is so different, right, and the capacity for reconciliation and to free us from tragedy, and the ability to, I don't know, kind of have arrangements that satisfy all human desire, and right, that sense that things are ultimately not fragile, right? That Plato, if you get it right, it's going to be good. So I think it's always been that tension. And I mean, I'm always like incredibly intrigued by Plato and his optimism and confidence. And in the end, I never buy it, right? But it's like the big system thinkers. It's like Hegel or Marx. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. It's all going to kind of systematically come in together, right? And then my other point, though, right, goes back to Lorna, what you said before, is I've just seen years and years and years and years and years students really, really respond to it, and that to me is always the most rewarding part of being in the classroom with students. And it's like, okay, this text still, over the course of, for me, a generation, has still been resonating with students. And I mean, Clytemnestra is my favorite character in all of literature. She's just, I mean, it's just amazing to me what an incredible, force she is, and to just sort of, I'm just always kind of incredibly drawn toward her, as a force, and just someone, for me, who's like so incredibly skilled as she is in words, right? So she's got that words, endless words I use to serve the moment, right? Or whatever that line is.
Yeah.
That capacity to speak. And of course, right, for us as academics, and speaking and the ability to speak is so kind of intoxicating. So, and it's interesting, as I never read it in class, and I never had a professor sort of advocate for it. I kept kind of coming back to it, and I read a lot of stuff about it just to try to navigate my way around through it. But I just really came to, and still just have this deep love for it.
Yeah, and you're not the only one. I'm going to kind of like switch into professor mode here.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah.
No, it segues so nicely from what you've said, right? I mean, this play has moved people for literally millennia, and not just schlubs like you and I.
Right,
You are the dean of academic life. But, so Robert Kennedy, the brother of John F. Kennedy, the night that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, he was scheduled to appear and make a public appearance in Indianapolis, and he was going to be addressing an audience of predominantly Black supporters in Indianapolis, and they don't know yet, because this is before like cable news and social media.
Nobody's got their phone on, right?
They don't know yet that the leader of the civil rights movement, this icon of Black freedom, has died and has been murdered, and he's the messenger. He's the one who's going to tell them. And so he stands up and he shares the news, and he offers, obviously, his deep sympathy and condolences. He says, my brother too was assassinated by a white man in this kind of extraordinary moment. And then he quotes Aeschylus. He says, there's this passage from my favorite poet, and it's a passage from Agamemnon, from the first play in the Oresteia. And I've got it queued up here. This is from our translation. It's not the translation that he recited that night, but it says, Zeus has led us on to know, the helmsman lays it down as law, that we must suffer into truth. We cannot sleep, and drop by drop at the heart, the pain of pain remembered comes again. And we resist, but ripeness, or wisdom as it's sometimes rendered,
Mm-hmm.
comes as well.
Yeah.
Right. And that to me is, you don't get better than that. And
No.
that's the lesson of the play, and it's a lesson that I think we never really learn, because
Right.
it's a terrible lesson.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is one reason why people keep reading this and keep being stirred and moved
Yeah.
by it.
No, I mean, it's amazing, right? I'm so glad you went to that and had it there too, right? I mean, and that, yeah, that notion of suffering into truth, right? Which we hear a number of times kind of in the first play. And then I think Orestes even says it, right? Like when he's at the base
Does
of
he
the
says,
statue,
yeah,
right?
he's hugging the feet. He's done all the purging, and he's like, I need a trial. Right? I've suffered.
Yeah, I have suffered in the truth, right? You're kind of like, okay, like this is a moment now. Yeah, I mean, no, right. I think Kennedy kind of, and right, I mean, I've heard he kind of memorized long sections of Aeschylus after his brother's assassination.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. It's incredible.
And then 2 years later, he himself,
Yeah,
right,
exactly. Right.
was killed. So on that chipper note,
Yeah. Time wise.
I think I'll wrap it up. But thank you so
Okay.
much, Art.
Yeah, I hope I didn't talk too much, but it was.
No, it's a delight. I mean,
Yeah.
I just want to say to my students, like, this is why I study political theory. Like, this is the guy that lit the spark. And
Thank you.
so it was you talking a lot about this book, but many other books as well, that
Yeah.
just made me fall in love with this stuff. So thank you. Thank you for letting me relive a bit of that.
Yeah, no, and thank you for saying that. It's that is a wonderful moment for me. Yeah, no, I so appreciate that. That's just moving you. You say that, and thank you very, very much.
All right.